Good afternoon or good morning. Let folks get settled in virtually here before we get going. I have disabled the wait room, so nobody should be have any difficulty getting in if they join us a little after the hour. Welcome everyone. Good to see some familiar names and faces here for another essential substance abuse skills webinar. Great to see some familiar names and faces. Always appreciate your continued support of this series, and really like exchanging ideas and knowledge with all of you. So great to see you. Just looks like there's a couple folks trying to join. I'm going to make sure. Yep, I've got the waiting room disabled, so everyone should be able to come right in. It looks like Michelle is still trying to join us, but why don't we go ahead and get started, and then we may have some colleagues join us here momentarily, but they should be able to come right in and join the webinar. So I want to just again welcome everyone to another monthly broadcast of our Essential Substance Abuse Skills webinars. Today, Avis Garcia is going to share a little bit about group counseling. And I'm hoping we can have a dialogue and that you guys can use the chat feature or the hand raise feature or whatever is convenient for you if you want to jump in and add something to the conversation. Hopefully this isn't a big slide deck, Avis, so we should have a chance to do a little bit of Q&A at the end. But if you have a question or something comes up in the moment, I'll try and watch the chat and maybe jump in. And we'll have a discussion about that in the moment.
Okay.
Currently, everyone is muted, and we just ask that for now you just stay muted. But certainly, if you want to unmute or raise your hand and jump in, we'd love to hear from you. So that's great. So my name is Steve Steiny. I'm one of the program managers here at the National American Indian Alaska Native ATTC. I feel like I know many of you because you've been on so many of our webinars, and I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but having that meeting somebody in person for the first time that you've known on Zoom for a while, it's a little surreal. It's like you feel like you've already met them, but you really haven't. So hopefully I'll get a chance to see some of you in upcoming conferences and different opportunities that we may meet in person. I look forward to that someday. And of course, I have with us Dr. Avis Garcia, and she's going to be sharing a lot of information. And I've said this before, some of this information, may be sort of a fundamental review for those of you that are practicing in the behavioral health field or have some experience, some clock hours in doing group-based services. We know that groups are an essential component to the therapeutic process, and I couldn't imagine doing substance use disorder treatment without having a group element in that service. Not saying you can't do that, but to have that group element really adds another layer or another level of meaning and purpose to the patient's treatment experience. So we're going to touch on some of that, and then Avis will also touch on some of the cultural considerations towards the end of the slide deck. So look forward to having a dialogue with all of you, and I'm going to go through a couple of introductory slides, and then I'm going to switch and get the main slide deck up and introduce Dr. Garcia to all of you. So I know you guys have heard this a few times, but this event is brought to you by the National American Indian Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center. We are located at the University of Iowa, and we are part of a larger national network made up of 10 regional centers, a national Latino, Latinx, Hispanic center, as well as a ATTC network coordinating office located at the University of Missouri. This project is supported and funded by SAMHSA. The content of today's presentation is developed by the presenter and may not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of HHS, SAMHSA, or the American Indian Alaska Native ATTC. As you know, we do record these events, and we will have a link to the recording of this event. If you have a colleague or that we're not able to join today, or you're not able to stay for the entire presentation, we'll send you a post-event email with any slides or links to this presentation as it's been recorded and uploaded. We are going to offer 1.5 CEUs. They're NADAC approved CEUs. You can use those towards your licensure or accreditation with your respective state. And lastly, we have a short survey. I'll post a link to that today towards the end of our broadcast in the chat box. This, as you know, is a very short survey. We've added a couple of more qualitative short answer questions so we can hear from you in your own words. Your feedback is really important to us and we value that. So you don't have to fill out the survey, but if you have a minute, we'd love to hear back from you. And I assure you that all of your information is private and confidential and can't be linked to you in any way. If you have questions about that, reach out to Avis or myself, and we're happy to share what we know about the survey itself. So thank you so much. Before we get started and I introduce Dr. Garcia, I want to just take a moment. I know we're here virtually, but I want to take a moment to acknowledge the land and pay respect to the indigenous nations whose homelands were forcibly taken and inhabited. Please take a moment to read this land acknowledgement that was created by 3 former members of our team, Ella and Keely Driscoll and Mr. Sean Bear. Thank you. Well, without further ado, I have mentioned her a couple of times, but I want to formally introduce today's presenter, Dr. Avis Garcia. Avis is a colleague and a friend, and I've had a wonderful opportunity to get to know her a little bit and work with her over the past, gosh, three years, especially, during the pandemic, and we've done some in-person trainings as well. So she is an enrolled member of the Northern Arapaho tribe and is affiliated with the Eastern Shoshone tribes of the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. And I know she's recently relocated back to Wyoming. So you really are coming full circle, Avis, once again. She is a LPC and specializes in addiction issues. She's been in the field for over 20 years. I say that, I'm just going to say it out loud, Avis. We know it's some time has passed, and but she really specializes in working with families, working with Native populations, and we're really thrilled to have her as part of our consultant group and part of our advisory council here at the center. So I'm going to just stop talking now, and I'll let Avis share a little bit more about herself as I kind of transition and get the next slide deck up. So welcome, Avis. Welcome, everyone. Let's talk about group counseling, Avis. What do you think? Oh, you're muted right now. So I'm sure you're saying.
Oh, here I was just talking away, giving this big old speech.
I'm sure we don't. Think how many things are missed. People on mute. We never hear them.
I was getting all animated.
I know.
My hands.
I knew it was something good. So I'm going to get the next slide deck up while you say hi to everybody.
Well, good morning, everyone. I was just saying when you couldn't hear me because I didn't know I was on mute that the topic today is on group counseling. And when it comes to substance abuse work, I feel it is one of the most effective and efficient ways to serve a large number of people in, short amounts of time. And as we get into the content of today's presentation, you'll see why group counseling is something that is very important, not just to substance abuse, but to mental health in general. There are many different reasons you can have groups. And so we'll talk about doing groups. As Steve said, I've been in the field for 21, almost 22 years now, which I never thought I would hear myself saying. And I take time to reflect on that and realize, wow, I've been through a lot. I've learned a lot in my actual work. And now I've also moved into actually teaching. So I am teaching for a university in California, and it's been really fun. So that's why I've always liked doing these ESAS presentations, because for me, it's an opportunity to teach everyone that's willing to listen and learn. So I appreciate all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to spend some time here and learn something or refresh your skills that you have if you're already providing services in the field to Native people across the country. So that's always been my goal, is to help Native people wherever I can help. Just a brief overview of what we will be covering today. The first part is the how-to types, membership, how to implement them, and the facilitation process. The second part will be group work with Native patients. So that's where I will focus more on the cultural aspects of working with Native populations. Okay, we will move right into the how-to. And there are two types of groups. And one of them is psychoeducational. This is mainly to provide some skills, coping skills, address some specific issues, and just helping people be motivated towards changing themselves and making themselves better. Often used to treat substance abuse, but also is for many other behaviors. And of course, the facilitator takes the role as the teacher, and also for skills development. So groups can be held to teach people some daily living skills in anything that will help them to achieve and maintain their abstinence. And it mainly comes from the cognitive behavioral orientation. So we're looking at the thinking and the behavior involved. Types of groups, I just got through saying most of them come from the cognitive behavioral aspect, which focuses on having a structured environment where group members can take a look at their behaviors, their thoughts and beliefs that lead to their maladaptive behaviors. And I've also seen people who become senior, I've seen groups evolve to where some become comfortable in groups. And so they start to, question other people and probe them a little bit and get them to think a little more deeply about comments they might make in the group. So it's always been an interesting and fun process. And then, of course, there are the support groups. Oftentimes, these support groups are self-help groups. For social support, as you can see in the parentheses, there is the unconditional acceptance and the inward reflection, really useful for patients to offer a safe environment and help destigmatize the problem or whatever activity is being presented. And the membership of groups can be fixed or revolving, otherwise known as open and closed. So the open type of groups are when people can come and go anytime they want freely. The closed group begins and ends with the same membership and oftentimes has like an application or screening process in order to join. So those are the differences between those two types of groups. Here's a little chart table with the two different types of groups with the pros and cons. So the open group, the pros are there are dynamics with new members. The patients don't have to wait. They're able to join right away. And then there's the cons, the dynamics with the new members. It's, you know, till you feel comfortable. It's like being the new kid in the classroom if you've ever been one. And the patient may have to, sometimes the cons, they may have to wait because there's not enough room. So that can happen. And then we have the closed groups. The pros are the improved group cohesion. So there is a process that the group goes through, which we will see as we get further into today's presentation. And also the learning builds on the previous meeting. So oftentimes these are a set curriculum that is lined out to flow in a series of sessions. And the cons would be the participant time commitment. So you have to be there. You can't miss group, because if you miss one, then you missed one of the building blocks to the whole curriculum oftentimes. And then the other con is having to wait. So, you know, if it's already closed, you have to wait until they have the next session unless they open another one. And we can move to the next slide. Group membership. Before putting a patient in a particular group, the provider needs to consider the patient's readiness, the characteristics and needs and preferences of the patient. Patients may need to move to different groups as they progress through treatment, and sometimes it's based on their needs. Some businesses or organizations operate in a menu format, and as long as they get the required number of hours needed for their level of care, some people can pick and choose what they're going to attend. And some people don't want to go to a group right away. And I often find this with the native population of, you know, well, I don't want to go to group. Do you think I need to go to group? And so it depends on where they're coming from, of the determination that we make. And I usually get the team involved when we decide how we're going to help an individual. And sometimes I start out with individual sessions with that individual to get them ready to go into group. And I always like it when they actually warm up and become comfortable in that environment and they're fine. So sometimes it's just a little bit of anxiety to take part in group sessions. And if you're following the chat comments, I see Steve's putting in there, age and gender can also be important. And that's true. You want to put them in specific groups. You don't want to put adolescents in an adult group. And then women may be more comfortable with a women's only group, and the same with men. So they're not always comfortable for whatever reasons. And again, our job is to meet them where they are and be able to meet their preferences as best we can possible. More on the group membership. It can be voluntary and it can be involuntary. So when we talk about being involuntary, they may be feeling a little bit of coercion to be involved because they may have, some resistance. They are there because court requires them to be there, family pressure. Sometimes it's the Department of Family Services that's requiring them to be there, or, it could be their family telling them that they need to go and get some help for themselves. And also the motivation to change, the self-motivation can inspire other group members and impact the group culture and the norms. So that's the involuntary. You can change the slide. The voluntary, I didn't even notice that changed. It looked the same to me. And then the voluntary group members often assist in providing motivation for pre-contemplators or contemplators. They can serve as effective mentors to the other group members. And this is what I was talking about, of seeing the senior group members who have been attending for a while, being able to kind of lead their peers that are new to the group and welcoming them in and getting them adjusted to the group format. And when this is voluntary, this is their self-motivation. They are just wanting to come to do this for their own well-being. And this can have a really good impact on people. So I've had the open groups where a lot of these people might involuntarily be there, but then more and more, I want to say over the last 3 or 4 years, I have seen a significant increase in the number of people who voluntarily are coming in and saying, I think I have a problem and I just need some help. And, you know, they're actually happy to go into groups. Oftentimes, patients indicate the primary mode of help is through mutual support. In other words, it's not the facilitator that's most important, but the mutual support. So other people like them. I think that also increases their level of comfort and safety and feeling that they're not alone. There's other people there, you know, and under similar situations and circumstances that brings them. So being able to relate, you want to see your classmates. Oftentimes we serve coffee, and there could be coffee groups, book clubs, weight loss. The content helps as well as seeing peers. So there can be groups on any number of things. There could be grief and loss groups and couples therapy groups or anger management groups. So there's several, the list goes on, it's endless. And you can create groups if you see a need in your organization that you think, we should have a group for that. So if you get creative, you can create your own group. I'm hearing some background noise somewhere. Okay. Those members who self-reported improvement were significantly more likely to have felt accepted by the other members, made references to particular individuals when they were queried about their experience, and also the perceived similarity of some kind among the group members. Some people feel more committed to particular individuals. So sometimes it's you know, maybe there's a mom in the group who has kids at home and she makes, you know, gets to know someone else in the group. And, you know, just that level of comfort really increases when they start to bond as members of a particular group. And then the self-help versus the mutual help. So the self-help implies the individual in treatment is the main contributor to the change process. So this puts this on them to apply it and use it and practice it. The mutual help means the individual also assumes partial responsibility for the recovery of their peers. So that's, you know, being supportive to who's sitting beside them, who's sitting across from them when they're attending their group. And then we have the implementation of groups. As the facilitators, we are responsible for establishing parameters for the group, providing general behavioral expectations while clarifying the purpose of the group. And I like this here, instead of saying group guidelines or rules or agreements, I like this group values, like, you know, what are our values for this group and how will we conduct ourselves while we're here? Rules or values such as goals, confidentiality, action. If somebody breaks one of those rules should be discussed at the very beginning. Incorporating patient suggestions into the group values. Ethics still apply if members express the intent to harm themselves or others, and mandatory reporting laws. So we're all mandatory reporters, and it's our job to make sure that people that we help are safe and those outside in the community are safe. So we have to be aware of that, and having them put input into it makes them feel more, I'd say, respected, involved, heard, that they're more willing to be a part of the group if they're part of the establishing the group values of how the group will be facilitated. So some things to remember as you implement your groups: try not to make group values too complicated or too restrictive. Focus on member safety, honesty, integrity, and self-respect. And focus on punctuality, being on time and end on time. And that's kind of hard for a lot of us natives who run on Indian time, and we're always running a little late. So it's really getting them to focus on that. I do know of a couple of programs who have some grace periods on that, because we like to believe that our people in Indian country, there's always some reason when they come in, they have a story to tell you why they were late. So just being respectful of their showing up is important. Then for the values clarification, you could ask, what do I mean by establish some parameters for the group? Why do we want this for our group? So getting them to realize, why is it important that we have these guidelines set up for the group so that people are heard, people feel respected, people feel safe, and why do we want this? And that's so that there's kind of some structure and some order to the group, and not just, wandering aimlessly as you go through your group process. Always be open to amending, adding, and adjusting. So again, they may come in and be there for a while and be like, well, why don't you do this? And why don't you do that? I've always had a rule of no cell phones in group unless they can give me a valid reason prior to the group of why they need it. Sometimes I've got parents with kids at home and they're like, it's just for emergency. And I'm like, okay, it's just for an emergency, but I don't want you to be on your phone, because I feel like they're not being respectful to me. And I always tell my people, I don't take my phone into group because I'm here to present this group and give you my time and my attention. So it's good to include that. And review these at each meeting if necessary. Some places actually print these on large sheets of paper and hang them on the walls. Or maybe there might be a big dry erase board where those are there to just be reminded of them every time they come in, and introduce it to new people if you have an open group setting. And looking at the values of the groups. So always, number one is respecting confidentiality. And I know one place where I always tell people when I go and see these different groups being ran, that one of the recovery treatment programs on our reservation here in Wyoming has that confidentiality statement right on the top of the sign-in sheet. And so we always start with reminding them always of the confidentiality, being non-judgmental and accepting others. So these are values that you either present or have them come up with, and having the willingness to disclose. So I have set some parameters of, when you first start, we're open to you coming in and just listening and sitting if that's what makes you feel comfortable. But eventually we'll expect you to actively participate, which means you'll probably have to disclose some information about yourself, or maybe we're doing a written assignment and we're sharing how we process that. And so you have to actively participate to receive the full credit for being here. That the participation is by everyone that is there. And oftentimes I may be the facilitator of the group, but I'm going to do the activity or whatever assignment it is that I'm having them do. I've always just done it along with them. I feel like it helps me too when I do it. Valuing the importance of the group, recognizing the available support in the group, respecting others, and also the willingness to accept feedback. So being able to take constructive criticism and allowing other people to speak without interruptions. Implementing groups continued by providing an initial overview, both individually and in the group. Clients will then come to the group with appropriate expectations. And the last treatment program that I was at, we were required by CARF, which is an international accreditation agency, they required us to have an orientation process to the groups that we had. So we covered a lot of this information up front, like no smoking, no weapons, you can't come under the influence. So they actually had up to an hour-long orientation, and they had to initial off on everything, that they understood what was going to be expected of them to be there. So, and that was a documented process that we had to have in place for that. And then clinicians and clients can expect a greater degree of success. So it's good to be able to spend some time with them before they go into group and let them know this is what, the group attending groups looks like here. And this is the stages I was talking to you about, more commonly seen in the closed group setting, but it does show up in the open groups. So these are the stages the group evolves through. So if you look at this table here at the very top, this is the group stage. The next one over is what the group is doing and what the leadership tasks are, and the likely group member behavior. So the very first stage of group development is the forming. So this is where we get to know each other and understand the group process. The leadership has introduction exercises, get to know the group members, give enough group freedom, allow initiative yet feel safe. And oftentimes when we have group, we may have an introduction, kind of a icebreaker to open it up, where everybody gets to introduce themselves a little briefly. So if there's new people there, they get to know people's names. And then the behavior here would be, it's all dependent on the leader. They might be uncertain what to do and searching for a strong leader. And nowadays, yeah, they call it a group facilitator, but in my years of practice, and I know here in Wyoming, if you have 12 or more members, you should have a co-facilitator. So that would be taking a second person in with you to help you with the group process. Then there's the storming stage, which is the next stage. So some people may be getting edgy about achieving a certain task. There may be some assignments that they will be required to present and share, and also wondering if the group has this, and wondering if the group has the skills needed for that storming part of the group. And the leadership task is to provide a sense of security, review and evaluate group performance so far. So being able to reflect on your own work is very important. And as someone who does clinical supervision, I often ask my staff to just journal, like, give yourself some reflection time and write to yourself how that went. And the group member behavior, there could be some rebellion, they could be testing the leader's skills. I've had it happen to me more than once. and authority, and a sense of apathy or hopelessness. You know, we're working with some people that are dealing with trauma on top of trauma. They've been living with drug and or alcohol use for a long time, and you know they can get overwhelmed. So they do need a lot of support. So it's important to pay attention of reading group members' behavior. And norming, allocation, and settling into the group roles, developing a procedure for achieving the group task. So this is when they start to feel a little comfortable after they've got through this storming process, and they're like, oh, okay, you know, this is feeling pretty good now. And so here, again, the leader is tasked with trust between the group members is growing, stronger relationships are beginning to grow amongst the members of the group, and clarifying boundaries and group values assist group members to move into roles and take more responsibility. So again, reminding of the values of the group that, you know, we all actively participate here for their own recovery process. And the group member behavior likely is a sense of enthusiasm. The members are beginning to take more responsibility for leadership of the group. I love this when it happens. It's great to witness. The next stage is the performing stage. This is where your group is involved in the activity to achieve the task. Encouragement, the leadership should be encouraging and keeping the balance between the group and maintenance and task needs. The group behavior from the members is a sense of getting the job done. I've been at places where, you know, they're keeping track of how many more groups they have to complete their levels of care. And so then they start to get a little excited because they start seeing a little light at the end of the tunnel, like they've gotten a lot of things done. And sometimes they're turning around and helping other people too, of maybe they're a little behind and didn't quite understand something. So it's good to see them start to step up and support their peers. And then finally, we have the adjourning, saying goodbye, evaluating the task. Did we achieve what we set out to do? The leadership will help the group members to say goodbye and face their next challenge, making plans for the future. Again, here, I don't know. I always sometimes interject my own culture. And again, I share from where I come from. In my Arapaho ways, we have no goodbye words. It's we will see you again. And so we never say goodbye. Likely group member behavior will be reminiscing, planning reunions. Group members, you know, often deny the end and make plans to keep in touch. I get people that say, can I come back if I want to, you know, and there may be some regression to former problems. And so some people, this has been a really security blanket for them, sort of, and they're a little afraid to go out on their own. So sometimes you may need to pull some people out individually to help them process, you know, leaving a group situation and taking the next steps. In creating a group, you need to remember, in most cases, that you are the single common element among all the group members. So usually it's one individual who your agency may have 10 groups, but the one staff member, maybe one group is their group, or maybe a couple of groups are there. So it tends to be a shared process. The other part is shaping the group. Your experience and behavior, as well as the expectations of the group members, will guide the formation of norms. The other is maintaining the group. You are the mediator, handling issues that might arise which can threaten group cohesion. Your job is to help the group function properly by showing confidence in your abilities, remaining calm and objective, and providing a safe environment. And Steve has something in the chat box of a co-facilitator. Co-facilitator is always nice. I don't care what size of group you have. If you can get a co-facilitator in there, I love the peer specialists. Some of them have graduated your program themselves, so they're able to really be good help. And here in Wyoming and in Montana, the peer specialists are specific roles within recovery work, very valuable. Here's an example of a group continuing care group agenda. And so it's kind of like a structured, kind of like your lesson plan for the day. So the first thing we're going to do is address immediate concerns. The next will be a relaxation exercise. This could be anything you want it to be, a guided meditation. The next step could be going over the group rules and expectations. The next one is welcoming the new people, making any mention of people that are about ready to graduate, who's not there, who hasn't been there for a while, and then UAs. And I know UAs take more than 10 minutes, so sometimes I've seen it take a good chunk of time if you start out at the beginning getting that done. And a lot of places it is a required part of the recovery program. Then we have the check-ins of everyone, name, their sobriety date, how long, how many days they've been sober, what brings them in, and what they're working on this week to continue their recovery. Then there's the topic. This one, how do I better handle high risk using environments in my recovery today? Big trigger for people. So it would be, example here is discussion and strategies and experience. Somebody might share how they manage those situations or don't manage by just not going. There might be a worksheet or some type of activity that they will be engaged in during that time. We may be sharing the worksheets or the group results, whatever it was that took place during that group. And then comes the closing and graduations if those apply. So having some sort of ritual to wrap things up to end the group. And then there's your group note. Some electronic health record systems are set up to where all the group members are on there and you can write one note and it drops into everybody's file. So I love those kinds of systems. And that took 90 minutes for that group. Okay. And I have seen groups run for 3 hours. So that 90 minutes could be part of a group. And yeah, here in Wyoming, and I'm pretty sure it's ASAM criteria that level 2-1, you should have approximately 9 hours a week of group. So sometimes they do 3 every other day. Okay, we can go back to the next slide. So common tasks of the group facilitator, whoever's going to do the group, you always have to maintain a safe environment. You serve as a historian, you summarize. So to wrap things up for each session or how far they've come, helping patients remain in the here and now by redirecting and bringing them back to the group. Sometimes they go completely off the subject. Sometimes this is something that needs to go into the group values. Helping patients discover answers for themselves, and we're not fixers. We are not to solve their problems. It's up to them to solve their own problems, and you can have fun. It doesn't have to be all boring and dry and dull. You know, us natives, we love our humor, but also remembering you're the professional there, so use your best judgment. Redirecting those war stories of the past or what was lost are the overwhelming task at looking at the future years from now. So some people may be like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to do this and this and this and this. So it's helping them bring it back to, we're just focused on what's going on right now, one day at a time. And getting the members to use the I statements. You are doing well. The facilitator is prepared, responsible for all consent forms, sign-in sheets, and other data. Again, a co-facilitator is nice for this. Sometimes you can team up and be like, I'll do this and you do that, or whatever works for the both of you. Greet and welcome everyone. Guide the discussion, manage participation, thank everyone, help clean up, and also a debriefing process. If you have a co-facilitator, now's the time to debrief on how did the group go? What did you, I saw this and did you notice that? So it's kind of the discussions. Co-facilitators, you need to avoid sitting side by side. It's generally good to have someone across the room, and one can be in charge of the nonverbal cues of members, can handle the sign-in, the room temp, visitors at the door, anything that might come up unexpectedly, help you monitor the time and help you clean up, and also participate in the debriefing process.
I would add too, I put it in the chat that co-facilitation can be a wonderful mentoring or training opportunity. If you have a staff person that has some good group facilitation experience, pairing them with a new staff or someone that's coming in that is a practicum or an intern, that can be a great way for that new staff or that student staff to learn and to see how groups are delivered. So that's
I
good.
have had interns come in and just take over the show and just be, when you're fresh out of school and you're turned loose, it's just the world is your oyster. And I just love it when the interns are excited and willing to take that on. Great point, Steve. Here we go to the next part of this. This is working specifically with Native people.
Are there, as we move into part two, are there any questions or comments? I've been just sort of, I've been monopolizing the chat box, but I just didn't know if anybody wanted to unmute or had a question in the moment that they wanted to, or a comment they wanted to share before we move on to talking about some of the cultural considerations for group service.
Yeah, you can drop them in the chat box, or
Yes.
when we get to the end here and we have some time for questions, I'll be happy along with Steve to answer your questions as best we can.
That sounds good. Just wanted to give an opportunity. So yeah, Willamette asks, can a peer do IOP group? Well, that's a good question. I would say probably
If they are a certified peer specialist, yes, they can.
Yes, they could. Yeah. Would it be advisable to put a peer recovery specialist who's inexperienced or maybe earlier in their recovery into an IOP group alone? Probably not.
No, here in Wyoming, the peers and Montana, you have to have documented sobriety for 2 years before going in, and they get training when they go in. And I've seen some of these peer specialists just really step up, and they're really awesome to have, because I have had the participants themselves, whenever that peer specialist isn't there, they're asking for them. Like, they really do connect with them.
That's a great point, Avis. Well, let's move on, shall we? Let's keep going.
I seen a little note in the chat box just as you switched the slide of the peer specialist training is called just that, peer specialist training. Most states have their own specific criteria to certify peer specialists. Here in Wyoming, it is a week-long course, 8 hours a day. So they spend a whole week in training that's just a real comprehensive, looks like an introduction to counseling type of program. And they're held to standards just like licensed staff are to continue to get education too. But they don't just get turned loose, they get a lot of support and a lot of training before they're allowed to move under supervision to help people.
And that holds true for just general staff.
Mhm.
We always wanted to have our staff supported and oriented and could shadow maybe a more experienced staff for the first portion of their hire to really learn and to build their own knowledge base. So yeah, those great. Glad you brought that up, Willamette, because I think it comes up sometimes in agencies that may be short-staffed or and this happened at our agency where we would have staff get put into a group facilitation before they were ready, and it can be really detrimental to not just the staff person and their own experience, but it can really do more harm with the group. So have to be careful about that and try and advocate for proper training and support before someone's put into a group by themselves.
Okay. Native people are also referred to as Native American, American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiians, First Nations, or other indigenous people, First Nations. It's whatever you prefer. Oftentimes, I feel like I'm educating people that don't know the proper term to use or what you prefer. And here is some demographic information. So the American Indians and Native Americans, there are 573 federally recognized tribes in the lower 48 states. Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian, there are 231 tribal communities in Alaska and within the Hawaiian Islands. Communication styles can be very different in Native communities, and they can become a little complex. It just depends on the situation. But you can go to the next slide. Go off on a tangent here with my stories. Communication styles for natives cannot be generalized. However, it's an important concept to discuss when working to improve providers' ability to work with Native people. Native people are sometimes taught that listening rather than speaking immediately is important. And I don't necessarily say taught. I think we just grow up that way, and that's just how things are. So as I've gone into education and really focused on, I really am different than these people. I do listen and I don't speak out a lot. I was very quiet, and I actually educated the teachers in my program of, what, we're just different, and we're taught to be respectful. So that is our way. And one of the values of the Arapaho people is that just having quiet is like the most peaceful way of life. So for the Arapaho culture, quietness is just, it's just a a part of our life that we value. We enjoy quiet. Personal information about one's self and family is not easily shared, which is why when they come into your groups or even to individual therapy, we're not there to pry this information out of them. So we need to be respectful of their choice and when they feel comfortable enough to share. Silence or minimal sharing should not be interpreted as disinterest or indication that something is wrong or something's wrong with them, or they're just not invested in this. They're not even participating. It's just, this could be new to them. So we have to be patient. Where English is the patient's second language, the speech may be thoughtful and slower. Some Native people, especially elders, may believe that talking about a topic wills it to come true. So sometimes these cultural beliefs and values and ways of life can come into your session. And the last agency I worked at, it was I loved being there. I kind of miss it now that I'm thinking about this. Is the Crow people are one of the few tribes I know that their language is still alive and well today. So they still speak their language, daily there. So it's, for some people, it's actually coming up with the words in English sometimes. Some more cultural considerations is the clinical experience. The bio, psycho, social, and spiritual builds upon and fosters positive therapeutic relationships. This is what builds trust. Very important. Trust is your most important thing as a therapist or a helper, just say helper. Increase the likelihood of treatment plan and adherence. A lot of times it's nice for experienced Native therapists to implement culture into that treatment plan, and reduces patient attrition. So that keeps them coming back, gets them involved. And cultural consideration also reaffirms patients as experts in their own health, mental, behavioral, spiritual experiences. Doing so, we help the patients make positive changes in their lives and increases their motivation. So how does this fit with the Native worldviews? Most often, working effectively with Native people requires a shift in the delivery of our services. And I might say that's more so for someone who is not of the Native population or of that specific tribe, because like I said, I was working on the Crow reservation. So here's an Arapaho coming in. So I had to have my cultural consultant brought on board so that I could always check things out with him. And how do we work from a culturally relevant perspective? Because sometimes something would come up and I'd be like, I didn't know that. So I could go to my cultural advisor on staff to process some of that information, to be like, okay, I'll keep that in mind the next time I come back, that, I'm different. And so I always reminded them that I'm not Crow, I'm Arapaho. So sometimes there's some differences in the way we see things culturally. The importance of spirituality, often part of cultural teachings, both learned and ingrained in the community. For example, death, birth, and puberty ceremonies. So our ways of life, how we live our life with all these different tribes, we all have different ways, the way all of these are addressed in our cultural communities. Spirituality is a part of a holistic approach to wellness. An example would be the appreciation and respect for the nature, environment, and our surroundings. As you know, we did the land acknowledgement at the beginning of this presentation. And for me personally, and I want to say most natives, a lot of our most sacred ceremonies are on the ground, and we sit on the ground. We don't have chairs, you know. Appreciation and respect for our health, bodies, mind, and our connection to the past. So that's the holistic. In my experience, taboo subjects can include HIV as opposed to diabetes, sexual behaviors, particularly the LGBTQ community, drug use, general issues and modesty and privacy, such as cross-gender communication. And modesty is not about shyness, but about respect. Is there any others people might want to add that might be taboo topics? If not, we can move on to the next slide. Some Native specific cultural risk factors. The lack of confidentiality affects trust. The lack of social services, rural and reservation. Limited access to comprehensive health care. The circular migration from the rural and urban areas. A lot of reservation people migrate to the cities, but they come back often for whatever it is they need to do, and then they go back again. So that's what we call the migration. Unresolved traumas, historical or otherwise. There have been the urban relocation programs, boarding schools, history of abuse, sexual or otherwise, and the racism, homophobia, and xenophobia. You have the opportunity to provide culturally respectful, meaningful mental health services. There is a pervasive and ongoing need for Native-centric or culturally sensitive mental health services. You have the ability to know and understand trends and needs. That is a key role. Engagement, confidentiality for some Native patients. This is an absolute barrier to care, linkage to care, retention in care, and aftercare. Native people may have a personal family experience with breaches of confidentiality. I've had experiences with that. And so a lot of times the trust goes away in whatever place that happened. It is critical we maintain the highest level of confidentiality if we are serious about improving the quality of life for all people. Using culture to help the engagement process. There are introductions, reaffirming them as experts in their own experience, and spirituality, opening and closing prayer. Someone in the group from the local community, an elder in the group, or you may have to lead it yourself. Engagement continued. There's the 10-second rule, especially for elders. The referral list of local Native organizations. So it's good to have all of that information available. Show up for other Native events in the community. The school here on the Wind River Reservation does provide some cultural days. I think they have like 3 full days of just all this awesome cultural stuff for their staff, because a lot of the staff are not native. So we have hand games, they have some dancing, they have some crafts, they have some cooking, just really trying to help them understand what our way of life is like and who they're working with. So this is a two-way street. We, a lot of Native people have been on this reservation and lived here all their life. That anything off the reservation or outside the reservation is like a little bit of uncomfortable territory for them. And I have some cousins who are actually like that. And so they may have a little bit of nervousness going some places. You always want to provide some snacks and some water, always offer something. The hospitality is a way of our life. And having some incentives, most agencies have some swag, maybe we have a coffee mug or a little appointment planner or even a pen, something. Some incentives, you could provide transportation. Both treatment programs on this reservation have transportation, which I feel eliminates a barrier for many people who don't have transportation. Offering food. I've had people just come right out in group and ask if we had anything to eat because they hadn't had anything to eat. And so trying to stock up on some perishable food items that they can have if that comes up. Some people, you got to know the resources where to send them to get food if that's what's needed. Gift cards. Literature speaks to the patient and provider relationship regarding incentives. Is the patient seeking services only for incentives, or is the patient personally motivated? As long as the patient is coming back, you have the golden opportunity to engage and build trust. I always tell this story, and I had some of the staff at one of the programs I was interning at when I was getting my doctorate, and this one gentleman, I knew him, we grew up together, and he would just come to just the sweats. And some of the staff were saying, he just comes to sweats. He doesn't come to group. He doesn't go to, set up counseling. And I said, is he sober? Well, yeah. Okay, then he's fine. He's getting what he needs. The sweat's what's bringing him here. Building relationships with community leaders. So consistency is vital when building these relationships. Be prepared to inform them of your program, your intent, and your process. So get those, your main points solidified so that, you could be asked to present at any moment of what your program is all about and how things are going. Give ample time to process information and ask questions. So if you want them to be involved in your program and support your program, build those relationships. Some more retention strategies: get local organization support, do outreach face-to-face, get out into the community when there's events going on, set up a little table, get your information out there. No phone calls, emails, or Zoom. Do this in person. And if it's a new organization, go to the top. Who's running the show here so that we can make that connection. And don't give up. If your first attempt doesn't go through, just keep trying until you get to where you're going. Integrating cultural activities such as dancing, beadwork, shawl making, skirt making, cooking traditional food. These can be great ways to build therapeutic trust, connection, and knowledge. I had one woman that attended one of our webinars here, and she said, "Oh, we while we're doing beading, we might put a slideshow on or some educational information while that's at the same time." And they enjoyed it, so there's creative ways of incorporating that and actually doing the work we're there to do, and taking the professional out of the professional and creating more of the personal. So just being yourself in working with the clients. And finally, you want to remind patients of Native specific cultural strengths that builds motivation, courage, and healing. Of be like, hey, we've been through all these terrible things in our past, and I always think whenever I'm struggling with something that my grandparents got through worse times than what I went through, and it's like, if our ancestors could survive so that we could be here today, we're still here. We're strong, resilient people. Native patients do not hear this information very often, so it's something to be proud of. I believe Native people know these strengths because they are demonstrated in our stories, among our elders, and through our ceremonies. So these have been handed on orally for years. And sometimes it just needs to be pointed out and reminded and built upon. And oftentimes when I'm working and I have had elders come in, and that's the things they point out is, a lot of this is missing and we need to bring it back. It needs to be here. It needs to be a part of. So more on the retention strategies. We are survivors. Our ancestors were survivors. We are resilient. We can adapt. We are community minded. We're always thinking of everybody else. Our spirituality is our way of life. We have a connection to the past, our family, our elders, and our youth. We have holistic thinking, that, the medicine wheel that has those 4 aspects of life, of to live your life in balance, to have pride in your culture, be proud of who you are. Be proud of your language. Most communities are doing language revitalization projects. There's apps that teaches language now. I think those are so awesome. Our food, this land, and most important is our ceremony. Our Arapaho tribe is one of the few tribes that has our most sacred ceremonies are still intact. We are able to continue them because of our ancestors.
Just a few reference slides. TAP 21 and TIP 61 are SAMHSA publications. I don't know if any of you recognize the Velasquez de Clemente book. That's the purple book, we used to call it at our clinic. It's got some really wonderful group counseling specifically geared towards substance use disorders. It was real popular back in the early 2000s and late 90s, but still relevant today. And then just a couple online references. And I don't know who those 2 are, Avis, but they look like they're up to something. I don't know. They've come down out of the mountains and now they're here on the page. Well, we've got 10 or 15 minutes. If there are some questions, I know earlier someone had asked, Shanoa had asked about what's the 10-second rule, and I tried to give a quick answer in the chat, just saying that it's allowing for that 10 extra time, that maybe 10 seconds or so for a response. And I think that's good in general practice too, for even for non-native patients, sometimes allowing that silence in a group setting can be hard. I struggled with that early on in my clinical experience, but boy, embracing that and letting that silence just sort of wash over the group can be really powerful. And it might just give that extra time for that patient that's doesn't know how they're going to, address an issue. Gives them just enough time to maybe muster the courage or the confidence or the trust to say something.
Mm.
Uh, Michelle's made a comment. Michelle, do you want to unmute and put this out there for the group? It's an interesting comment.
Yeah, so I was talking with a client actually yesterday. I have a private practice. I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor in the state of Massachusetts. And she was saying that earlier in her sobriety, she was exploring different options to, address her addiction. And she, I think, was encouraged by her mom, where she took, I believe she said it was ayahuasca, and had this, it was psychedelic. She kind of went on this trip, and like a hallucinogenic trip. And from what it sounded like, she was struggling with heroin. It actually did support her lessening her heroin use, but it sounded like there was some cross addiction with her drinking use may have been more inspired after that. But I didn't even think of that as an option. It was very interesting. I mean, as you know, there was a whole ritual to it. There was a shaman, there was other people that were also doing the practice with her. So it was just, I didn't, I don't, it was kind of humbling in that sense where, oh yeah, that is an option. I think we get so used to the day to day and the American culture that we forget, hey, there's other ways to address things. There's cultures look at things in different ways. Now we're talking about microdosing, and I've seen a lot of, really great research on that. So it's really kind of, I think, not only keeping up to date on what new practices are, but also, I know I can struggle sometimes to just think outside the box as far as cultural, ways to approach it. She ended up finding that Suboxone MAT has been helpful to her, but I thought it was really cool that she was open to trying different options, because there's so many options. And I think sometimes, I don't know, I get like blinders on, and I can forget that, oh yeah, there's way more options than I am even thinking about, or even supporting my clients with. So I just thought that was really interesting. I didn't know what anyone else's experience was like, either having tried that option or clients trying that option. I was curious to see what others had to say on that.
That's a great comment. I can turn it to Avis if she wants to address that. I have a couple of thoughts about that as well, especially looking at it in a group context, But Avis, what are your thoughts about? I know Native American Church uses. There are some elements of using certain plant-based medicines to connect with the spirit world, and I know that the ayahuasca that you mentioned, Michelle, is really rooted in South American culture. And I just attended a big conference in June, and the research being done on the use of hallucinogens to treat other substance use disorders is sort of taken. It's been around for a long time, but it's sort of gotten some traction in the last decade, and is really come around. So I think it really, to me, and then I'm gonna be quiet, but I think it really, to me, and you alluded to this, it's important for us to realize that there are many pathways to recovery. And unfortunately, in the Western sort of perspective, it's very abstinence based. It's very black and white, and so if I overlay that in a group setting, Imagine trying to facilitate a group where half the patients were committed to abstinence and the other half were committed to harm reduction, or an alternative route that involved using another substance. It can really cause some dissension in a group setting. But individually, I think you should turn to your agency, look at their policies and procedures and protocols for expanding, alternative medicines or alternative approaches to recovery. So but I'm glad you mentioned that. And it looks like there's some comments too in the chat. So I'm going to open the floor and then also let Avis jump in there.
Wait, I wanted to bounce off that just for a quick moment. I won't take up too much of your time, but it's interesting you say that because it is reminding me of the folks that are on, a harm reduction model of medication assisted treatment and trying to go to AA or trying to go to NA, and there might be this stigma where, well, you're not sober. And so they don't feel comfortable going to those support groups, yet they're not getting that network that they maybe need. So it's like kind of a double-edged sword, everyone, we're only supposed to really judge our own sobriety, and not others. So. Oh, that's good. I hope it is changing because I find it to still be a concern for some of my folks.
Yeah, this what did you call it? Ayahuasca?
I know I had to Google it because I don't know how to spell it.
It is something new to me, but I watch a lot of TV, and I have seen where they are using hallucinogens with PTSD. And so it was just a movie, of course, but I found it very fascinating. And as Steve said, seems to be this emerging trend of that particular substance being used as a therapeutic intervention. But when you were talking about this certain individual, and I think Steve was kind of leading to me on the Native American church, because I am a member of a Native American church, and I believe it saved my life. And my grandfather took me there when I was probably, at my lowest points in life, and brought me back. But I had my instructor when I was getting my master's in addictions who was just so against it because he was so totally into the abstinence based, and he was saying, you're using another substance. I'm like, no, we're not using another substance, especially when it is helping people heal and get in recovery. Yes, they might be using it, but we use it in a respectful, cultural way. Like I have, some very dear friends close to me that I know are in recovery, and this is how they keep themselves in that recovery, is by being an active member in the Native American church. And it isn't something you have to do if you participate. You have the option to say no, but like I said, I grew up on and it wasn't just used in ceremony, it's used as medicine in my family anyway. So it's always, I think it's a very helpful thing as part of culture to integrate that to whoever is open to it. It's not anything I would say you need to do. It's up to the individual to decide if they want to participate, but it is, the Native American church has it's very healing.
I think what it opened up for us discussion wise was spirituality. It was interesting that that's kind of where the conversation went, and we were seeing a lot of parallels as far as spirituality and recovery, and it was just, for us, that I think that was the And the learning experience, I think, for both of us on that. Well, what is your spirituality? We haven't talked about that. And I think that is an important part of the recovery. Talk so much about how your mental health and physical health are important, but so is your spiritual health. And I do see a lot of people flourish with that in their recovery, whichever direction they end up going, even if it's just this idea of the universe being your higher power. It's, because we know how selfish the disease of addiction can be. It's, kind of combating that by that exploration beyond ourselves.
There is a gentleman who has some really good books out there that might be of interest to you, by Eduardo Duran. And just talking about that subject, if you're interested in learning more about that, I've really found his work to be very influential in my work as a therapist.
Thank you.
Okay. I can't read these. My last comment there.
Sorry, but I was muted. There are some good comments coming in. If you guys want to unmute, and I agree, Shanoa, that's the big debate right now is, how can you be in recovery and still be using a mind-altering substance? It really is a shift in the way we look at substance use disorders, but also the treatment of mental health disorders, PTSD, and other human conditions where the quality of life is really reduced. There's a really great short documentary it's a short series on how to change your mind. It's a great sort of participant documentary where this prominent psychiatrist goes and takes this journey and explores these different pathways. And it's worth a watch. But yeah, I agree. There are microdosing, the use of alternative medicines, hallucinogens have been around since the 60s and even earlier. So it's not a new thing. It's just sort of reinvented itself. But yeah, great comments in the chat on this. That's a real provocative topic. It bleeds over into, what is recovery and how do you define it versus how do I define it? What's success? What isn't? There's research going on here at the university related to this as well. So it's something I think we'll see unfolding in the next decade or so in the field of substance use disorders. But I would say too, overlay it with groups, and how do we deliver groups? Think about the formation of the group. If there isn't an established set of norms or expectations, it can really make facilitating a group difficult. So I've often thought it would be interesting to actually facilitate a harm reduction group and to really experience what that is like. I'm a person of long-term recovery, so for me, it's hard to imagine using substances, in moderation or under medical supervision. But I know that it is a possibility and it does work for a lot of people. So I can't close myself out to this idea professionally. And I think it's important that we stay open to something that's new or different or not what we're used to seeing in the linear sort of Western medical approach. But great, really appreciate this. Yeah, I agree. Charlene saying regarding fentanyl being put in a lot of drugs. It is. It's absolutely terrifying. And I don't know what the solution to this is, other than, like we see now, we see naloxone being distributed for free, and we see law enforcement and other providers carrying this and having this. having fentanyl testing strips might be, the only way to really assure that people
Yeah.
aren't taking a medication that's something different than what they think. It's very concerning. And I don't know what the solution is.
I gotta go. It's time
Yep.
for me to go. I've got
Yep,
somebody
we're at the
waiting.
bottom of the hour, everyone. I want to thank everyone.
Yes,
And I'm going
thank you,
to,
everybody.
I'm posting in the chat box again, the post-event survey. If you have a moment to fill that out, great. If not, we'll reach out to you via email. We'll see you again next month. According to my whiteboard, we are going to talk about, oh, there it is. We're going to have a special guest. Ken Winters is going to talk about adolescent development and substance use disorders. So please join us in September and we'll have that discussion and talk about that special population. Thank you, everybody. Until next time, please stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay connected. Bye.